The kid pointed. The woman screamed, and by the time the sirens came around the corner, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Bright green lawns, pressure-washed driveways, and the faint scent of magnolias drifting down the street. Nothing ever happened here. That was the whole point. The neighborhood's biggest excitement most weeks was whether a garden gnome had been stolen or if Mrs. Levin's cat had ended up on a neighbor's roof again. Maplewood Lane looked like something from a real estate magazine. But today wasn't like most days. At precisely 8:43 a.m., a man in dark cargo pants, sunglasses, and a faded gray jacket walked calmly down the sidewalk, a black backpack on his shoulder and a small handheld device in his grip. She saw herself not just as a community leader, but as the guardian of all that was pure, safe, and properly trimmed. As president of the Maplewood Homeowners Association for the last 7 years, he stopped every few houses, pointed it briefly, tapped the screen, and moved on. He looked like he was inspecting something, but not for fun. It looked like a camera, or maybe something else. That alone was enough to trigger Brianna Mayhew's instincts. "Who's that?" her grandson asked, standing behind the sheer curtain. Brianna's tea trembled in its cup. "No idea. He's not from here." The man stopped across the street. He scanned the curb, glanced at the storm drain, then jotted something into a notebook. "He's taking pictures of people's houses," the boy whispered. "I'll handle this," Brianna said sharply, but she didn't know that her grandson had already picked up the landline. 911, what's your emergency?" "There's a guy here on our street," the boy said. "He's taking pictures. I think he's a robber or something." The dispatcher asked a few more questions, and within 5 minutes, 2 police cruisers turned the corner. And just like that, the calm, sleepy Maplewood routine was over. The cruisers didn't come quietly. Their lights cut through the early morning haze, and the sound of the sirens pierced through every closed window on Maplewood. He didn't flinch. He simply lowered his device, straightened his posture, and turned to face the approaching officers. Neighbors peeked out from behind. Some came onto their porches, gripping coffee mugs or phones. theman.com. Still scanning the area. Didn't run. Officer Ramirez stepped out of the first cruiser. His hand rested casually near his holster, but his face was neutral, professional. Behind him, Officer Jenkins, younger and more reactive, looked around nervously as if expecting an ambush. "Sir, can we speak with you a moment?" Ramirez asked. The man nodded slowly. "Of course." Inside was a silver badge and a government ID card. "Mind telling us what you're doing out here this morning?" "I am conducting a field inspection on public infrastructure access points and utility vulnerabilities in residential grids." He reached into his jacket slowly and pulled out a thin leather wallet. These neighborhoods were flagged in a routine audit as potential cyber-physical weak points. "I'm just documenting, not interfering." "Names, Daniel Rourke," he said calmly. "I'm with the Department of Homeland Security." Her robe was wrapped tightly around her like armor, and she stormed across her lawn with her phone raised, already recording. Jenkins blinked. The seal at the bottom shimmered with a watermark that couldn't be faked. "Come again. I've already cleared this with local authorities. Your HOA doesn't override federal operations." Rourke offered a slight smile. "Your storm drains, your fiber node covers, your old irrigation systems." Ramirez leaned in to examine the ID. The badge was authentic. The photo matched. But before he could say anything, a voice shrieked from across the street. The man standing in front of him wasn't the villain he imagined. I've worked in 27 cities in the last 6 months. Your neighborhood is not special. It's just on the list. I don't want to be here any more than you want me to be. No van, no crowbar, just a clipboard, a badge, and eyes that looked tired, not dangerous officers. That man is taking unauthorized pictures of people's homes. It was Brianna Mayhew. He was photographing my mailbox? That's a federal offense? Rourke sighed. No, ma'am, it's not. Ramirez read it, looked up, and handed it back. You have no right to be here. This is a private community. This is a publicly zoned road with city-managed infrastructure, Rourke replied evenly. Ramirez stepped between them. Ma'am, please lower your phone. This man is cooperating, and he has credentials. But she wasn't done. My grandson called 911. He was scared. Why would a child feel threatened unless something was wrong? That's when the kid emerged from behind her, looking suddenly unsure. Ma'am, Rourke said quietly. That silenced her. Briefly, still a little tense, asked, Do you have paperwork for this assignment? Rourke nodded and handed over a folded letter stamped with DHS and signed by a regional director. He checks out. But what about my grandson? Brianna said again. He was afraid. Ramirez looked at her carefully. Fear isn't always based on facts, ma'am. Sometimes it's just noise. There was an awkward pause. Then Roca added, And noise is what gets exploited. Nobody understood that line. Not yet. But they would. And it would start with a pipe under Maplewood Lane that hadn't been inspected in 17 years. The news about the incident on Maplewood Lane traveled fast, not through official channels, but through whispers, Facebook posts, and neighborhood group chats titled things like Maplewood Watchdogs and Eyes on Evergreen. Within hours, half the community was convinced that a terrorist scout had been arrested in broad daylight, while the other half thought it was a disgruntled former resident coming back for revenge. The truth, it was far more complicated and far more dangerous. Daniel Rourke didn't go home after the police cleared him. He didn't report the interaction. He didn't even mention the unnecessary call to his superiors. He just moved 5 blocks down and continued his inspection in another cul-de-sac. Cool, smooth, unemotional, because to him, the kid's 911 call wasn't a problem. It was a preview. He'd seen it before. Overreaction, paranoia, neighbor, turning on neighbor. It was exactly the kind of noise that hid the real threats underneath. And that was what brought him here. Not the residents, but the silence under their feet. Back in his rental SUV, Rourke unfolded the blueprint again. A series of old city schematics from 2003 that showed every storm drain, conduit box, and control junction beneath Maplewood and the surrounding blocks. Most had been updated in 2011, but not Maplewood. Maplewood still ran on an old irrigation and pressure grid, one with unpatched valves and exposed signal points. To most people, it was harmless. To someone who knew what to look for, it was like a broken lock on a bank vault. He zoomed in on a section marked Drainage Line C17. It connected to a larger water control system rooted beneath the HOA park. the same park Brianna Mayhew had fought to have resurfaced 3 years ago. It wasn't just grass and benches. Underneath it was a relay hub, and if the data was right, it still used copper wiring. Copper? In 2025, Rourke tapped the screen and frowned. He needed access. But access meant returning to the very neighborhood that had already called the cops on him once. And this time, he wouldn't be standing on the sidewalk. He'd be beneath it. When he came back, he didn't bring a camera. He brought the entire Department of Homeland Security. 3 weeks passed. The HOA thought it was over, that the strange man with the backpack had been a mistake, that the inspection he mentioned was just a fancy excuse to avoid charges. Brianna Mayhew had even printed out an apology she never sent, just in case the city called. But Daniel Rourke hadn't gone silent. He had gone dark. In that time, he had compiled a full case report, cross-referenced signal logs, radio interference maps, water pressure anomalies, and one thing kept showing up: Maplewood. The data was masked, but the timestamps matched moments of private activity. Email, check-ins, home camera feeds, encrypted Zoom calls. The buried copper lines weren't just vulnerable. They were active. The relay was transmitting signal spikes to a remote server routed through 4 dummy domains. The neighborhood was being watched, not by the feds, not by the police, by someone inside the HOA, and the signal relays weren't installed by the government. They were paid for with Maplewood's own improvement fund. Rourke submitted the report to DHS Cyber Infra Operations. It was classified in under 48 hours. And then, without warning, the raid was authorized. Behind him were men and women in DHS field gear, laptop briefcases, fiber optic line scanners, and unmarked crates labeled Infra Ops. No flash, just precision. It happened on a Thursday. The sun hadn't yet broke in the sky when 5 black SUVs rolled into Maplewood from 3 different entry points. At 5:47 a.m., Daniel Rourke stepped out of the lead vehicle wearing a tactical vest, government ID swinging from his chest. Neighbors opened their blinds in confusion. Some walked out in slippers, blinking at the lights. Then came the loudspeaker. Maplewood Homeowners Association, please remain inside your homes. This is a federal infrastructure security operation. Brianna Mayhew's door opened. She stood in her slippers, bathrobe, and perfect bob-cut hair, her face locked in a mask of disbelief. And then she saw him. Rourke, same man, same sunglasses. No backpack. This time, you, she hissed. Morning, Ms. Mayhew, he said. We need access to your records. All of them. That's a felony misuse of funds, a violation of federal wiretap laws, and potential conspiracy to breach civilian privacy. Under what authority? He held up a federal court warrant, signed and sealed. Mine. She stepped back, speechless. Your community fund was used to purchase unregulated surveillance equipment connected to outside servers. I don't know anything about. No one ever does, he said quietly. But the receipts don't lie. Inside the HOA office, a back room in the clubhouse. Rourke and his team swept the area. Within 15 minutes, they uncovered 2 laptops connected to private monitoring software, an external hard drive containing footage of over 87 private residences, financial records signed with Brianna's digital signature approving purchases from a dummy company. "What is this?" she shouted. "That's not mine." "You signed it 6 times, Rourke replied. "We checked the metadata." She lunged toward the hard drive, but an agent intercepted her. And that's when it all unraveled. The neighbors watched in stunned silence as Brianna Mayhew was placed in handcuffs and escorted out of the HOA clubhouse. "This is a mistake," she screamed. "I'm not the enemy here." "No, ma'am," Rourke said. "You're not the enemy. You just sold the keys to the vaults." The same kid who had called 911 that day watched from his window. He recognized the man. Only this time, he saw what everyone else missed the first time. This wasn't a stranger. This was someone doing the job no one else could. Funny thing about silence. Some people fear it. Others use it. But the ones who survive know how to listen to it. Daniel Rourke stood in front of the Maplewood HOA sign one last time. The sky was the same soft orange as the day he arrived. The air smelled of trimmed lawns and watered driveways. But everything else had changed. Brianna Mayhew was gone, released on bail, awaiting trial for wiretapping, misuse of community funds, obstruction of federal inspection, and 3 counts of falsifying city permits. The HOA board had scattered like leaves in a storm. 3 resigned. 1 disappeared entirely. The youngest, a volunteer treasurer, confessed everything under oath. He had no idea where the tech was coming from, but he was told to sign the receipts or lose his home discount. Maplewood's perfect facade had collapsed, and it all started with a kid calling 911. Rourke didn't go back underground. That part of the job was done. The junction boxers were sealed, the rogue transmitters removed. DHS had rerouted the lines through proper fiber shielding, and the city fast-tracked a full modernization grant under the condition that no HOA would ever manage infrastructure again. The neighborhood was safer now. But Rourke didn't come back to check that. He came back because of a letter. It had been left in his agency's Dropbox. Handwritten, no name, childish handwriting. "Sorry, I called the police on you. I didn't know you were a good guy. My grandma said you were bad, but you weren't. You saved us. See no return address. Just Maplewood." Rourke folded the letter and put it in his jacket. It was worth more than a medal. He turned to walk down the sidewalk, the same one he had been stopped on weeks ago. The same porch where neighbors once recorded him now stood silent, but one window opened. The same boy stood there, eyes wide, holding a small note against the glass. 2 words. "Thank you." Rourke paused, gave the faintest nod, and kept walking. Voiceover closing line. They called the cops on a man with a camera, but never asked what he was looking for. Turns out it was them. Turns out he was the only one watching for the right reasons. Story moral: in a world of fear and judgment, it's easy to label what we don't understand. But sometimes the person you fear is the one keeping you safe.